best and worst of the previous year that just ended a couple of days ago, 2018. And also, this is my 5-year anniversary hosting Words on Film. Yeah, it's amazing. I started hosting the show on January 7th, 2014. I've been hosting it roughly 49 to 50 times a year. And honestly, I've kind of lost track of the number of actual shows I've been doing, but it's been amazing how far both this show and Boston Free Radio have come. It started, like most things started, pretty modestly in a very, very small studio in the back of the Somerville Community Access TV studios here in Somerville. And since then, we've moved to a more spacious, and I'd probably say more ostentatious studio. And I'm not going to do a lot of highlights of my show because a lot of the earlier shows I didn't actually tape. But I've been at this for 5 years, and it's been quite a journey, and one that I would probably not give up for anything. So, getting back to the fact that this is the best of 2018 in film, I'm going to be doing my first segment, which is not what's topping the box office. It's what topped the box office, topped being past tense. So this is a rundown of the top 10 highest grossing films domestically of 2018. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I only have about 5 minutes. But there are a lot of surprises, including one film on this in the top 10 that actually isn't a hit despite being one of the top 10 highest grossing films of the year. But more on that in a little bit. So I'm going to do this list ascendingly, not descending. In other words, I'm going to start with number 10 and go to number 1 rather than what I usually do, which is go from number 1 to number 10. So here we go. The number 10 highest grossing film of 2018 was Solo, A Star Wars Story, which is all the more ironic because on a budget of $275 to $300 million, here in the States and Canada, it grossed $213.7 million. Internationally, it grossed $392.9 million. And I don't think that made it one of the top 10 internationally, but domestically it just made it. What's ironic about this is that Solo, A Star Wars Story actually bombed at the box office. Here in the States, it wasn't a hit. Internationally, it only eked its way to being a tentative hit. But it just goes to show you that just because you're one of the top 10 highest grossing films of the year does not automatically make you a hit of any kind, let alone a certified hit. Number 9 at the box office is Ant-Man and the Wasp, which did really well for itself. It had a modest budget compared to other Marvel films that came out this year, which was $162 to $195 million, somewhere in that range. Domestically, it made $216.6 million, making it a tentative hit here in the States and Canada. Around the world, it made $622.7 million, which is still really impressive. It's the third highest grossing film of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and overall, in terms of Marvel movies, it's the fourth highest grossing film of the year so far. So very good for Ant-Man and the Wasp. It had a lot to live up to, but it did pretty well for itself. Mission Impossible Fallout shows that A, the Mission Impossible series has not run out of juice despite going through 6 films in 22 years, and secondly, Tom Cruise can still draw them in. So it had a modest budget of $178 million. Domestically, it made $220.2 million. Internationally, it made $791 million. Aquaman is number 7 at the box office in terms of 2018 gross. We probably won't see it in 2019, but it still did a lot better than I expected it would, and it's still making money. On a budget of $160 to $200 million, Aquaman has made so far $260 million just here at home, and around the world it has made $943.2 million, and that is just in 3 weeks. That is incredible, especially for a DC film, since that series has kind of hit the ground stumbling, critically and somewhat commercially as well. Dr. Seuss's The Grinch is also, like Aquaman, still making money, but it's the 6th highest grossing film of 2018 and the 2nd highest grossing animated film, having made $269.6 million here at home and $498.3 million around the world so far, and that's against a budget of $75 million, but it's probably ending its streak, especially since Christmas is over. And the top 5 highest grossing films of the year domestically are Deadpool 2, which made $318.5 million here at home and $742.7 million worldwide against a budget of $110 million, making it the 3rd highest grossing Marvel movie of the year so far. Actually, total, period. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom did not do especially well critically, but commercially, on a budget of $170 to $187 million, made $416.8 million here at home, and around the world it made a staggering $1.31 billion, making it the 4th highest grossing film here at home, but around the world is the 3rd highest grossing film of 2018. Number 3 was The Incredibles 2, which is, of course, the highest grossing animated film of the year. Against a budget of $200 million, it made $608.6 million here at home and $1.24 billion worldwide. And you can probably guess what the top 2 highest grossing films of the year are. They are number 2 here at home, Avengers Infinity War, which against a budget of $316 to $400 million, made $678.8 million here at home and $2.05 billion worldwide. And finally, the number 1 highest grossing film of the year is Black Panther, which made, against a budget of $200 to $210 million, $700.1 million here at home, which was over $25 million more than Avengers Infinity War, but around the world, it made $1.35 billion. So Avengers Infinity War actually made the most money internationally, but Black Panther made the 2nd most, but still was number 1 here at home. That's very impressive.
It only takes a minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it at doihaveprediabetes.org. But you're probably not going to, are you? Kids, work, listening to the radio. You're busy, which is great because busy people can't get prediabetes. Oh my, I read that wrong. They can. Should have worn my glasses. So visit doihaveprediabetes.org and take a short test, because prediabetes can be reversed.
Brought to you by the Ad Council and its pre-diabetes awareness partners.
Hi, this is Joanna Bremis, hostess of The Joanna Bremis Show here on Boston Free Radio at Somerville Media Center. Tune in every Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. Please stay tuned for great music, first half of the show in English and second half in Greek. Thank you.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and this is a special Words on Film show, as I mentioned before the break, because first of all, I'm celebrating my 5-year anniversary of hosting this show, which I started doing on January 7th, 2014, and I'm still going strong. I'm definitely not giving up this show anytime soon. But I'm celebrating by basically doing what I usually do, but it's a special show for another reason too, because for this show, I'm counting down the best and worst films of 2018, in my opinion. So for the best and worst, of course, I have a lot of fun putting those lists together. It's actually a lot more painful to put together the best list than it is the worst list, because the worst is kind of undisputed. The best is very, very subjective, according to, well, basically just everyone who has an opinion about movies, which is just about everyone. So, but I actually found that putting this list together, I had a lot more potential picks for the best film than I did the worst. I think for the best, when I was putting my list together, I came up with 36 films that I absolutely loved, whereas the worst I came up with less than 20. So I'll get to the worst on the last part of the show, but now I'm going to focus on the best, which again was very, very hard to do, but I did put it down to 10 films, and I don't think I'm actually looking back on this one. So without any further ado, here are, according to me, the top 10 best films of 2018. Also, I should note that the views and opinions expressed on this show about movies or otherwise are solely those of yours truly, your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of any stations that are airing this broadcast or the station as a whole. Now, without any further ado, let me get to the top 10. So, number 10, best film of the year, Ready Player One. This is a film that unfortunately came out in between Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War, and for that reason, while it was a hit, it wasn't what I call a certified hit. In other words, the budget for this movie as well as the cost to promote the movie did a little bit, well, let me put it to you this way. It basically, the amount of money it made covered that much its budget and its distribution costs, but not enough for it to be a monumental hit in the same way that those other two Marvel films were. But I still love this film because it details in really a creative way the not too distant future, in this case it's 2045, where much of humanity, not just Americans, use the virtual reality software Oasis to escape the desolation of the real world. And an orphan teen by the name of Wade Watts, who's played by Ty Sheridan, discovers clues to a hidden game within the program that promises the winner full ownership of the Oasis. So it's kind of a neat scavenger hunt with a bunch of really cool nostalgic Easter eggs in it, but also it tells an amazing story. And while I certainly have my heart in the right place for the various Marvel films that have come out this year, I think Ready Player One was surprisingly overlooked, and it really shouldn't have been given the great cast they had in this film, including but not limited to Ty Sheridan, Olivia Cook, Ben Mendelsohn, Mark Rylance, Simon Pegg, and various other people who occupied space in this movie. But it was also immensely creative, and I just couldn't take my eyes off the screen when I was watching this film. So I do think that hopefully Ready Player One will get the attention in later years that it deserves. But in the meantime, it's my 10th best film of the year. Number 9 is First Reformed, which is directed by Paul Schrader and stars Ethan Hawke, Amanda Seyfried, and Cedric the Entertainer. And this is a film that raises some very good theological questions about the state of the world today and what people who basically work in organized religion and hold leadership positions in organized religion, like Ethan Hawke's pastor does in this film, how they address the complexities of the world, especially given the state of the world it's in right now. And I'm not talking politically, I'm talking environmentally. And this movie certainly has characters who take the wrong course of action in terms of dealing with their lives, but it also shows the struggle that Ethan Hawke has as a pastor trying to preach the good word while he knows that the world around him is literally coming apart. And the movie does not pull any punches in terms of the complexity of the world today, but Ethan Hawke has an amazing performance in this movie. Amanda Seyfried, you kind of know, is going to be the love interest, but of course, that doesn't hinder from my love of this film, and it's certainly one of the most overlooked films of 2018, but probably less surprising to be overlooked than Ready Player One. But it's a movie that is certainly complex, certainly unpleasant, but I loved it just the same, and it's my 9th favorite film of the year. Number 8, Eighth Grade. This is a film that's directed by Bo Burnham and has a cast of some seasoned actors. Of course, it has a star-making performance by the lead in the film, who is around the same age as the protagonist in the film, Elsie Fisher, who's also been getting a lot of great press for this film. Now, I've reviewed some really cheesy movies that take place in junior high and some in high school, and one of my big grievances is most of them don't reflect the pain of junior high. I have horrible memories of my junior high years in the late 90s, but Eighth Grade is probably the movie that comes closest to the agony and the anxiety of junior high, probably next to 1996's Welcome to the Dollhouse. But I did think Eighth Grade certainly had a lot of great acting in it, and it was very deeply rooted in realism, but it also had some very funny and very poignant moments in it. And Elsie Fisher in the film was amazing. So amazing, I didn't even think she was acting in the film. So, eighth grade shows how much has changed since when a lot of adults my age or older were in junior high, but it also shows that there's a constant. Junior high sucks, and there are still those social circles that you can't wait to get away from once you leave and go to high school. I think eighth grade details that brilliantly.
What if I could tell you that a full-blown wildfire was going to occur tomorrow right where you live? Tell you exactly which neighborhoods it would engulf and how fast it would do it. The first thing you would do is talk with your loved ones and make a plan today. It's true, I can't tell you a wildfire will strike tomorrow, but shouldn't you make a plan anyway? Visit caloes.ca.gov and make your emergency plan today. Don't wait, communicate. Brought to you by Cal OES, FEMA, and the Ad Council.
Never Stop the Madness, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. BostonFreeRadio.com.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, now counting down what I think are the best films of 2018. Just a little bit of a recap. My number 10 best film of 2018, Ready Player One. Number 9, First Reformed. Number 8, Eighth Grade. And I didn't do that on purpose, having the number 8 movie be Eighth Grade, but it just kind of fell into my subjective rating system that way. It's entirely coincidental, I guess. So now, number 7 best film of the year, Black Panther. This is another film very much like Ready Player One. It's full of a lot of action, some great special effects, but also, like Ready Player One, it has some amazing characters in it. A lot of people have approached this film as if it's the first film with a black superhero, which it isn't. It also isn't the first financially successful film with a black superhero in it either. But it might be the best film with a black superhero, not to mention one of the best Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and also probably one of the best superhero movies ever made. Not just because the titular superhero, Prince T'Challa, aka Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman, is such a great character, but also this movie shows that it's not just a superhero that can save civilization. It's also an entire village. And I think that some people have complained about this movie, and it's minor complaints, I might add, because mainly this film's experienced nothing but really good reviews. But a lot of people have said that the supporting characters got too much screen time, and because of that, Chadwick Boseman's character was not painted with as many light strokes as probably he should have been. In other words, he was bland. I don't agree with that at all, but I do actually praise this film for presenting a number of other supporting characters that were strong and, interestingly enough, made Black Panther who he is, both in terms of character and also in terms of prowess. And I think that there are some great supporting performances in this movie by the likes of Lupita Nyong'o, Danai Gurira, and probably the star-making performance of the movie, Letitia Wright, who plays Chadwick Boseman's character's sister. I also loved Michael B. Jordan as the villain in this movie. He was multidimensional and had definitely some Shakespearean qualities to him. And certainly the entire movie itself was quite Shakespearean. And it's certainly a movie that I will see again, and I have no question that this deserves a spot in my top 10. And I feel bad that sometimes that I can't put certain movies higher than others. But again, it's the sort of the nitpicky process of making the top 10 best films of the year. Number 6 in my best films of the year is Bohemian Rhapsody. And I'm not just putting this on the list because it's the highest grossing musical biopic film of all time, which it is now, not adjusted to inflation. I'm putting this on the list because it is incredibly well done. Basically, it covers not too much of of Queen's legacy. It covers them from their beginnings in the early 70s to around the time that they were doing the Live Aid concert in 1985. And Rami Malek embodies Freddie Mercury so well in this film. It's one thing that he looks a lot like Freddie Mercury, except for maybe his eyes, but it's another thing where I was watching this film and it wasn't just an impersonation that I was watching. It was a fully fleshed out character whose sympathies I could most certainly identify with. And I also thought that Lucy Boynton had a great performance here as Freddie Mercury's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Of course, if you know anything about Freddie Mercury's personal life, you kind of know why that's not going to last as long as other movies might embellish. I also loved Gwilym Lee in this movie as Brian May. And not only were the personal lives of the Queen members, particularly Freddie Mercury and Brian May, fascinating in this film, but I also loved how the film focused equally on the music, actually showing how songs that were iconic to Queen's catalog, including but not limited to Bohemian Rhapsody, but also how songs like We Will Rock You and another one, Bites the Dust, ultimately got composed and released as singles. I thought that was as fascinating as the lives that these band members left. And for that reason, Bohemian Rhapsody is my number 6 best film of the year. Number 5. This is a film that I have not reviewed on this show yet, but I will next week. Number 5 is Vice, which is directed by Adam McKay and stars Christian Bale, Amy Adams, and Steve Carell, amongst other people. And Vice is a biography about Dick Cheney, particularly from his beginnings in Wyoming around the 60s when he was first convicted of a felony for drunk driving, up to the time he left office as Vice President of the United States. And why did it focus more on Dick Cheney than it did on, say, George W. Bush? Well, there's a particular reason for that. Dick Cheney was and still remains a controversial figure, although his controversy has died down, particularly because of the controversies of the president under which we currently live right now, the administration. But this movie, directed by Adam McKay, not only has a flawless performance by Christian Bale, who plays Dick Cheney young and old, and even when Christian Bale was playing the younger Dick Cheney and not in that heavy makeup, I thought I was watching home movies of Dick Cheney rather than seeing Christian Bale make a performance. And this could be Christian Bale's best performance to date, and that's saying a lot. I also loved Amy Adams in this film as Lynn Cheney, and just about every supporting performance, including Tyler Perry as Colin Powell, was top-notch in this film. Granted, of course, this is a film that's coming out of Hollywood. It's produced by Will Ferrell, who imitated George W. Bush on Saturday Night Live. So one could argue that there's some liberal bias, but overall, I do think that it's a well-acted film, and it also raises some interesting questions about the level of power that a person should have, even when occupying the highest, or in this case, the second highest office in the free world. And I think it's a great film.
Hi, I'm Danica Patrick. Watching my nieces grow, play, and learn is amazing, but not every child gets to be carefree. 1 in 6 kids in the U.S. are hungry. This breaks my heart, and it's something that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and gives it to families in need. To help, visit feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and I'm counting down the best films of 2018. So I'm going to do a recap right before I give you my number one. I'm not going to do any honorable mentions because, honestly, I had 36 films that I thought were great this year, and I think that's probably more than I usually pick. Usually it's around 20 to 25 great films, but this year was quite exceptional. So without any further ado, I promise, here are the top 4 films in my top 10 best films of the year. Number 4, I wanted to choose a documentary not just to make a checkbox, but also because there were some exceptionally good documentaries this year. And it was a toss-up for me between RBG and Won't You Be My Neighbor. And I really had a very hard time choosing between either of those movies. But in the end, I went with my number 4 spot belonging to Won't You Be My Neighbor? Because, well, RBG has a little bit, quite a bit of a liberal bias to it. It is objective to a certain degree, but you won't see a documentary be made of, say, Antonin Scalia or Anthony Kennedy or any other conservative justice. But again, I love that documentary. It will most likely be nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the Academy Awards, but so will this movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I think that Won't You Be My Neighbor is not only an incredibly well-made documentary that details the life of Fred Rogers in sequential order, but it also shows what made Fred Rogers, through his show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, so revolutionary despite being so low-key. And I admired Fred Rogers going into this film, but I admired him even more coming out because, as this movie details, this is a guy who was so dedicated to children's education through the medium of television that not once in his 33-year run of hosting Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did he pander to kids or sell his message out or do anything really nefarious like that. And Won't You Be My Neighbor is a great reminder not only of his legacy, but also a message that a lot of us could use today, particularly in a divided nation. And the same could be said about RBG, but I chose Won't You Be My Neighbor for my number 4 spot. Number 3 is a movie that I have seen already, but I have not reviewed for this show, and that is Roma. Roma is a film I will be reviewing for my show next week. It's directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who directed such films as Gravity, for which he won the Academy Award. He also directed Y Tu Mamá También, which was the film that put him on the map, as well as other more well-known films to Western audiences like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban and Children of Men. So Roma is a film that makes the ordinary extraordinary. It's about a woman who works as a maid for an upper middle class family that lives in Mexico City. It's incredibly well shot. In fact, the story is so intriguing that you forget as you're watching it that the film is in black and white. Why it's in black and white and why it took place in the early 70s, I don't exactly know, but I don't really care when I'm watching the film because it's so well acted, and I have sympathies for just about everyone on the screen. In addition to the fact that Yalitza Aparicio, who is the star of the movie, had not acted in anything before being in this movie. It's incredible how well she does in this film. Number 2 of the top 10 best films of the year, Black Klansman, directed by Spike Lee and starring John David Washington, Adam Driver, and Topher Grace. This is a film that details the true story of a black police officer, Ron Stallworth, who infiltrated the KKK despite being black. And the way he does that is quite amazing. Plus, I think Spike Lee delivers probably one of his best films of his career, certainly his best film of the 21st century, and that's even topping The 25th Hour, by not only showing how intricately Ron Stallworth, played brilliantly here by John David Washington, infiltrates the KKK, but also bringing some underlying messages about racism and bigotry and how it really, sadly, hasn't changed since the 70s or even before that, as well as ending with a very poignant message about the rise of the alt-right and some of the consequences that's had not only for the black community but also for America in general. It's a film I loved. I made sure after I saw it to put it in my top 10, and that's why it's there, at least at the number 2 spot. So, before I reveal the number 1, let me do a recap of the top 10 best films of the year. Number 10, Ready Player One. Number 9, First Reformed. Number 8, Eighth Grade. Number 7, Black Panther. Number 6, Bohemian Rhapsody. Number 5, Vice. Number 4, Won't You Be My Neighbor. Number 3, Roma. Number 2, Black Klansman. And my number 1 pick for best movie of the year is Hereditary. Hereditary came out in a year where there were only 2 great horror films. The rest of them pretty much sucked, and they will be in my worst list at the end. But what made Hereditary so scary was that, other than some of the supernatural elements, it was entirely relatable as to what made this scenario so scary. In other words, sometimes family trauma can be scarier than anything that hides in the closet or under the bed. And I think this movie details that perfectly. It has top-notch performances by especially Toni Collette and the actor who plays the son, Alex Wolff. Both of them do amazing jobs. I hope they get award recognition for this film. And yes, it is an unpleasant film. Yes, it is a dark film. And yeah, it is horror film. But in a decade where there have been less than mediocre horror films, with the exception of this year, Hereditary stands above all the rest, easily fitting in the same kind of category of best horror films of all time, with Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist, amongst other films. Hereditary is a film I've seen once. I probably wouldn't want to give it a second look, although I probably will for research purposes, but it's the film that stayed with me the most, and not just because it's unpleasant, it is because it is great. That's my top 10 best of the year. Stay tuned for the worst.
He found them.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun. 911, what is your emergency? Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Diane Wong here, announcing a new radio program. Let's talk about race. From our beginnings as a white supremacist society to our current existence as a white supremacist society, race is a topic that affects us all, and yet we have difficulty talking about it. Why is race so difficult? Why can't we talk openly about white supremacy? Why don't we like to talk about white privilege? Why is internalized oppression shrouded in mystery? What about lynching? What about gerrymandering and the current Black Lives Matters debate? We'll talk about all of it. Come and join us Thursdays from 7 to 8 p.m. Let's talk about race. Boston Free Radio.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and this is a special Words on Film show, as I've said, for a number of reasons. First of all, it celebrates my 5-year anniversary of hosting this show on Boston Free Radio, and what a ride it has been. Before, I started in a very small studio that was basically a closet, and since then, I've expanded to not only going to another Boston radio station, WBCA 102.9, WBCA-LP Boston, but I've also expanded to being on television and also on Facebook Live, and this show is only going to keep expanding. So a little bit more on that towards the end of the show, but right now, I've already highlighted for the first half of the show the best of 2018. Now it's time for the worst. And this is kind of like a second Christmas to me because there's no such thing to me as going to a movie and wasting time. But if I see a bad movie, of course I'm angry that it's bad, but also I look forward to putting it towards this part of the year, this special show at the beginning of the previous year. This is basically an hour and a half to 2 hours of my life I am never going to get back. And I've got a couple of rules about my worst of. Okay, so here they are. First of all, I have to have seen the films. There are no films on this list that I haven't seen. I don't put movies on this list that are bad by reputation that I haven't seen. So for instance, I haven't seen Sherlock Gnomes or the Cloverfield Paradox, which I hear are bad, but because I haven't seen them, they're not on my list. And frankly, even though I can see the Cloverfield Paradox anytime I want to on Netflix, I don't want to waste my time with it from what I've heard. And also, number two, I try not to put any independent films on this list. Of course, I recognize that there are filmmakers out there who don't quite have it yet, and I'm not going to pick on them. So, with that said, also, I'm putting the worst in categories rather than doing a top 10 list. This is what Siskel and Ebert used to do when they hosted their show At the Movies, and this is what I'm going to do too. So, my first category, without any further ado, is Scary Bad. Now, there were two great horror films that came out this year, Hereditary and A Quiet Place. But there were so many other horror films that sucked the big one. And these are the two worst. My first one is Slender Man. Now, of course, the creepypasta of Slender Man has been going around the internet for the last 8 or 9 years. That's not what makes this movie bad. What makes this movie bad is the fact that it follows every other horror film cliche with the teenage girls who are researching this creepy creature on the internet, and eventually they have to say, they're told, don't say this chant with the candle lit. Sure enough, they're lighting the candle and they're saying the chant. But in addition to that, the scary man himself is not that scary. He basically looks like the AOL man in white with a suit. That's it. It's basically a dot, or a guy with a dot for a head. That's not scary at all. Another film that was bad, scary bad in my category, Truth or Dare. Now, Truth or Dare basically takes an unoriginal premise. Of course, these naive teenagers, or in this movie it was college students, who do an ill-advised game of Truth or Dare, and then they find this paranormal entity that's haunting them, and the movie had some thrills, but overall it was not scary and not good either. Plus, I know a film like this has been done with a child's game before. Truth or Dare added nothing new to the genre. It was bad. That's why it's in my worst films of 2018. My next category for worst films of 2018 is Epic Fails. These are movies, two of them, that were definitely creating a cinematic universe of some kind, but it's unlikely, given how poor they are and how poor they performed at the box office, that they are going to create a franchise. My second pick for Epic Fails, going up to number one, is Mortal Engines. This is a film that borrowed so sloppily from Lord of the Rings, Maze Runner, The Hunger Games, so much so that it lacked any originality whatsoever. And I even fell asleep a couple of times during this film because I was bored so much. Plus, they had cities that were on wheels now for some odd reason, which doesn't make any sense to me. It was never explained very well in the movie. Maybe it was in the book upon which it's based, but needs some explanation in the movie, some better exposition. This film just didn't have it. There was nothing special about it, and it just sucked. My number one pick for Epic Fail, though, is Robin Hood. This one had some excellent actors in it. It had Taron Egerton from the excellent Kingsman movies. It also had Jamie Foxx, and none of them were good in this film. Plus, you had the bad touch of having Jamie Dornan from the 50 Shades movie in this film as well. Granted, he wasn't the worst thing about the film, but he didn't help either. Plus, they had this allegory of the Crusades being compared to the Iraq War, which was done ham-fistedly, and it just wasn't very good. Plus, there were, of course, arrow fights, as you might expect in a Robin Hood movie, but they made the arrows appear unrealistic, as in when people shot them, it almost came off like bullets, where they were taking off concrete siding, which arrows can't do. Plus, I didn't have any thrill when I was watching this film. Plus, I didn't buy the romance between Robin Hood and Maid Marian. While I give them a little bit of credit for doing something maybe a little bit more original with Robin Hood than has been done before, this Robin Hood just was bad. Probably as bad, if not worse, than Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves from 1991, starring Kevin Costner and Morgan Freeman. That was just an ill-advised movie that also wasn't fun. And Robin Hood at least tried to be a little bit more fun than Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, but not in a way that particularly worked. So for that reason, Robin Hood is my number one pick for the category Epic Fails. I only have about 30 seconds left before I have to take a break, but there are other films that are on this worst list, and I'm going to get to them while talking up a storm. But again, I just want to emphasize that when I was putting together my best and worst list, I had less than 20 really bad films, and the best certainly outweighed the worst. So that probably makes 2018 probably one of the best years of film for me.
Hello, it's me, the designer jeans in the back of your closet. What happened to us? I used to summer in the Hamptons, and now I'm stuck behind a pair of sweats. Okay, maybe I never really fit you right, but I got a lot more Sunday fun days left in me. So take me to Goodwill, where I can really make a difference.
Your donations to Goodwill create jobs, training programs, and education assistance for people in your community. To find your nearest donation center, go to goodwill.org. Donate stuff, create jobs. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
I love those real 6 They're the ones that move me. The thinly blow, neurotic toe. Intensify and groove me.
All this and more on Unpopular Music, Saturdays at noon on Boston Free Radio.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and I am counting down the worst films of 2018. And I'm putting these in categories because I don't usually do a top 10 list. Just bad is bad. There's really no saying that this awful movie is better than that awful movie and so on and so forth. So that's why I'm particularly putting them in categories. Plus, this is what Siskel and Ebert used to do and what a lot of other critics are not doing as much. So my next category is Only If Your Kids Have Been Bad. These are the worst children's films of the year. And honestly, I couldn't find many bad children's films. The worst ones I found were there, though. My number 2 choice of Only If Your Kids Have Been Bad was The Darkest Minds, which stars Amandla Stenberg, who's a young actress who I really admire. And she did great in the movie The Hate You Give, which came out later in the year. But The Darkest Minds was a ham-fisted, not so very subtle way of trying to create another preteen franchise, and it just didn't work. The plot was really stupid. The decisions of the adults, and for that matter, some of the kids in this film just didn't really work. It was obviously trying to take some of the momentum of the Hunger Games from years before, and it just wasn't as well acted. It also wasn't quite as plausible as other films that have come before it. And I just didn't really care about the characters either. So for that reason, it gets my number 2 pick in Only If Your Kids Have Been Bad. The number 1 pick, the undisputed worst children's film of the year, because I haven't seen Sherlock Gnomes, is Show Dogs. Did you ever want a movie that combined miscongeniality with maybe, I don't know, some talking dog movie like Mr. Peabody and Sherman? I didn't either. And that's what this movie does. It has a lot of very talented actors in it, like Will Arnett, and some good voice talent by the likes of Chris Ludacris Bridges and Jordan Sparks. But man, this movie was terrible. When the dogs moved their mouths to speak, I actually found that scary. There was particularly one scene where the main dog in the film, who's voiced by Ludacris, gets a waxing, and the way his mouth moves when he gets that wax is supposed to be funny. It isn't. It's actually scary, and mainly this film was just stupid. Having a police dog go undercover to compete in a Westminster dog show-like competition, it's stupid. I don't think kids would even like it. It's just worst kids film of the year, unquestionably. The next category I'm going to present to you is comedies without the laughs. Of course, the worst comedies of the year. Starting with number 2, this was a Netflix original which starred and was produced by Adam Sandler, and this is continuing a streak of films of Adam Sandler's that are mediocre to just plain awful. This one is The Week Of, which also co-starred Chris Rock, Rachel Dratch, and a number of other comedians or comic actors who I usually find funny, but in this film, it was just dull, and the scenarios in this film were completely unrealistic. And because they were unrealistic, there was no poignancy to them. And plus, these were allegedly smart characters who are just making extremely dumb decisions one after the other. The thing that really bothered me about The Week Of, though, is the part in the movie where there's a hotel owner in Long Island who is neglectfully running his hotel. Now, I don't have a problem with that character. The problem I have with this character is that he's a foreigner of indeterminate origin. But Adam Sandler is basically throwing this throwing this wrench into his logic in implying that people who are from other countries can't run their own businesses and cut corners whenever they can. That's not necessarily true with foreign business owners, and Adam Sandler seems to make that argument here in this film implicitly. So that's why The Week Of is the second worst comedy in my opinion. The worst comedy of the year goes to Action Point, which is more like Action Pointless. This movie stars Johnny Knoxville as the owner of a rundown theme park that somehow gets customers to go to its theme park despite being not only extremely dangerous, but also really run down. And it's supposedly based on a real theme park named Action Point, but I would bet that the real Action Point was in better repair than this movie. Plus, the antagonist of this film is a real estate developer who wants to buy the land from Action Point, tear the whole park down, and build condominiums on it. And judging from how awful this park is and how it doesn't seem to do any sort of service to the community, I side with the real estate developer, and that's not a good sign for characters for whom you're supposed to root, especially Johnny Knoxville's character. And Johnny Knoxville is a likable guy. Certainly he has his share of these stupid stunts, but that's part of his charm. So, next category of bad movies, true story, bad movie. I have 2 picks for this. The second pick is Gotti, starring John Travolta and Kelly Preston. This is a movie that could have been good if John Travolta had maybe been a producer and cast somebody else to play Gotti, somebody who's a little bit more charismatic and also full-blooded Italian. John Travolta does a passable job in this movie, but overall, the story of the structure of this film, which was supposed to be the saving grace of the film, ended up sucking. They did this sort of non-sequential order that didn't work. Plus, the film should have focused on the relationship between John Gotti and John Gotti Jr. I would have liked to have maybe seen the movie through the perspective of John Gotti Jr., but I didn't see that either. But the worst film that's based on a true story is Winchester, which is played as a horror film, but it's not scary. It almost went into my category of scary bad, but it is based on a true story, so I put it in this category instead. And even the capable acting hands of people like Jason Clarke and Helen Mirren, most especially, did not save this film from basically being forgettable. Maybe the house looked scary, but it didn't look particularly scary to me, and I don't even remember the plot of this film, really. I remember a guy goes to visit a house that has a reputation for being scary. That's all I really remember. There is nothing good about this film. Cheap jump scares, and it should have been better.
I'm little teapot, short and stout.
Here is my handle and here is my spout.
No, Dad, like this. When I get all steamed up, then I shout, tip me over and pour me out.
This is WWE superstar Roman Reigns. It only takes a moment to make a moment. Take time to be a dad today.
Visit fatherhood.gov, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Every Tuesday at 3, something special happens on Boston Free Radio. Why, it's Toppers with your host, Gil. Toppers, spinning the tunes that today's youth demand, from Justin Bieber to Lady Gaga to the Fleetwoods, and, on occasion, Hoagie Carmichael. If you missed the program, you can check out the archives at Toppers Radio, that's one word, .blogspot.com. Toppers.
Welcome back to Words on Film, the spoken word show dedicated to moving pictures. I'm your host and movie critic, Dan Burke, and this is a show that highlights the best and worst films of 2018, and of course, I've saved the worst for last. These are the top 2 worst films of the year. I suppose I could choose one film as the worst of the year, but I'd like to give another one a dishonorable mention. Plus, this segment of the show is just fun. So, the number 2 worst film of the year is Death of a Nation, Can We Save America a Second Time? This is a pseudo-documentary made by a pseudo-intellectual who is also a pseudo-good director, Dinesh D'Souza. There's a lot I can say about Dinesh D'Souza that I really don't like, and it's not just his politics. But Death of a Nation is probably one of the worst documentaries I've ever seen, particularly because in a divided nation like the one we have, we probably want to have somebody who is intelligent, who is showing us maybe what unites us as a nation. And despite the subtitle of this film being titled, Can We Save America a Second Time?, Dinesh D'Souza doesn't want to save America. He just wants to throw sticks at liberals and basically say that liberals today are pretty much exactly like they were back in the 1860s. Oh, scratch that. Democrats today are basically essentially what they were in the 1860s when they were proponents of slavery, and nothing has changed. Now, he doesn't give any examples of how Democrats today haven't changed, and he particularly just says, no, you're the racist ones. And I would like for him to show me any Democrats who are withholding people of color from voting, which a lot of Republicans certainly did this year, obviously. And yeah, Dinesh D'Souza is just a pseudo-intellectual, and I actually have a lot of doubt that he graduated from Dartmouth College, Phi Beta Kappa, like his Wikipedia page says he does. Because if he submitted Death of a Nation as a senior thesis, he would at best get a C-, and that is from a sympathetic professor, regardless of their political beliefs. So, Death of a Nation, worst film of the year, second worst film of the year, and it promises to compare Abraham Lincoln to Donald Trump, which it does for about 5 minutes, but it ends up comparing Barack Obama more to Adolf Hitler. And there are actors in this film who portray Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler and other historical figures who are no longer with us. And the guy who portrays Adolf Hitler is actually depicted in this film as saying in German, if you tell a big lie often enough, it becomes the truth. Now, Adolf Hitler may have said this. He certainly lived by it. But Dinesh D'Souza, despite being anti-Nazi in this film, seems to advocate that or live by that statement. And that's troubling. But it's not as troubling as the worst film of the year, which I will announce right now. I know you guys who are listening are brimming with anticipation. So here it is. The number one worst film of the year of 2018 is 50 Shades Freed. This is a film that promised to be sexy and wasn't. And that's probably my chief complaint with the original 50 Shades of Grey. And 50 Shades Freed is more like 50 Shades contractually obligated. I could see in this movie that Dakota Johnson just wants to move on with her career, and I say all the power to you. Jamie Dornan is so bad in this film. He is awful. There is one scene which is supposed to be dramatic where Anastasia and Christian are having an argument about starting a family and raising children. And there were people in the audience as I was watching this film, which fortunately I didn't have to pay to see, that were laughing during the scene. Just the way that Jamie Dornan clumsily went through this movie. And my problem overall with 50 Shades Freed is not only that it's not sexy, and it isn't, and not only because it has terrible characters, which it certainly does, but I don't care about the relationship. Yeah, they had some kinky sex before, Anastasia Steele and Christian Grey, but they're married now, and I guess they're starting a family. My question has always been, so what? And this movie, unfortunately, never answered that question. It's a terrible film, avoided at all costs. And that is the best and worst of 2018. It's been great doing this show for 5 years now. It's amazing to me that I have gone this far. And of course, I'll have to wrap things up because I've only got about 30 seconds left. But you've been listening to Words on Film on Boston Free Radio and WBCA LP Boston. And the views and opinions expressed on the show are solely those of your host and movie critic, Dan Burke. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of any employees working at the station airing this broadcast or the station as a whole. This is Dan Burke saying, I'll see you at the movies, and happy 2019.